This is my testimony about all of these situations. The worst things that anybody ever did to me, bar none, the worst things, the worst crimes, the most horrible acts ever committed against me were committed by people who claimed to be Christian. Christian means follows in his footsteps. So I'm going to go through the list of Christians who did horrible things. The best Christians that I knew, and some of the worst as well. Brenda Dickinson was supposedly a good Christian. I thought, I hoped, and I believed, and I was wrong. Laura Nelson, I thought her to be at least trying to be a good person, but she wasn't Christian. She was going to come forward and tell the truth. Then she found Jesus and wanted to use that as her excuse to say nothing and to do nothing and to allow it to happen, knowing full well that I hadn't done anything wrong, that I had told the truth. After Natalie was killed, all these supposed Christian folks who purported to love me, even his family, Brenda Dickinson claimed she thought of me as her son. And then there's the whole Bollinger family, claims to be Christian. Rod Wright claimed to be Christian. When I had to try to find somebody who wasn't too cowardly in Chapel, Nebraska, to turn in the crimes that were committed against me with me so that I could safely turn it into the police without being antagonized or bullied, I recorded it. Rod Wright recorded it. And so did Deputy Holloway, one of Scott DeCosta's deputies. Somehow, after they took my computer, all three of those recordings vanished. Another thing, these Christians wanted to use Jesus as their excuse for complacency, to look the other way, to not come forward about what they knew. Well, you have the Fifth Amendment available to you. However, I have the First Amendment available to you, as well as recordings and screenshots of your exact words and in their context. Of recordings of the things that you did and the way that you turned a blind eye, like at that church in the Dalles, Oregon, when Jamie was assaulted by that man. That video is called Jamie Again. If you type the words Sean David Jamie Again, you will find a video recording of a woman named Jamie in the Dalles, Oregon getting punched in the back of the head. A man pursues her for being disabled. When I tried to turn that into that was on church property, by the way. When I tried to turn that into the church, I was not treated very well. Natalie Bollinger claimed to be a Christian. I wonder, did she do the most horrible stuff that she did to me before or after she became a Christian? Because the things that her sister Alicia did to me in Virginia, those things were horrible. Making such horrible assumptions and projecting such horrible things onto a person because they're stranded and alone and scared. That's horrible, especially when it's over a phone that I didn't even want. Now, I want to talk about a very specific situation in Nebraska. So, Leslie Snell and Scott DaCosta wanted to use religion as their excuse for not doing the right thing. And the same thing with Polly Olson, who's the dual county clerk and also a witness to some of these situations. And also Rod Wright, who claimed to be a preacher. He was not ordained. And of course, none of them are helping me to turn in the fact that people are threatening to kill me. They're assaulting me. They're threatening to kill my friends and family, even in Chapel, Nebraska, over things I never did. Natalie could have come forward before any of that became an issue. She could have come forward in October of 2000. Sorry, I got to say, November of 2016. In November of 2016, I unblocked her. Before that, she didn't know any of the horrible crap that people were doing to me. I hoped that they'd knock it off, but they didn't. So when I unblocked her, it was specifically to let her know that people were harming me that much. That her friends were harming me that much. All Natalie had to do was say, he didn't molest me, he didn't rape me, we didn't date, it was nothing like that. The same thing with Alicia. The rumors that Maddie Boa spread were horrible. And they very specifically showed that the supposed people that Maddie Boa was claiming that I did horrible stuff to in Virginia were Natalie and Alicia Bollinger. And they never accused me of doing those things, not once ever. All I've been trying to do is get Natalie Bollinger and Alicia Bollinger in court to admit that I didn't do those things. And everything has been done to prevent me from doing that by people who claim to be Christians, people who knew what was going on, and now they're ashamed. They're ashamed that they didn't take it seriously when they could have done something. And then they want to tell me that they're Christians. They will allow these assaults to continue because they don't want to admit they made a mistake. So I made a video where I spoke up about these Christians and I used the Bible and I explained that Jesus goes through a whole bunch of this. And mind you, I actually took this sermon from somebody else and I do apologize for that. But I also put it basically into the Cliff's Notes. This is what it amounts to. Yes, Jesus, basically when he was saying all these people who were going to die, and he listed all these people who were sinners, and he went through that entire list, and by the end of the list, you realize he's literally named everybody. Jesus has said everybody's going to die. He himself said this. So, the whole video was explaining how Jesus is not the best excuse for you guys to do the horrible things that you do or to look the other way. the horrible things that people who claim to be Christians saying that they were going to cut off my balls and slit my throat and things like that, telling me that they're going to kill my friends and family, actually making those threats. And you've gotten to see the so-called threats that I had, right? You got to see them. You've gotten to see in these Natalie Bollinger groups what they called threats. No, there were literally no threats against anybody in Natalie Bollinger's family until after she was dead, and then there was only one person in her family that I ever threatened. And that was to try to keep the rest of her family and my friends and family safe from Ted Bollinger. He went out of his way to be as threatening as possible. Oh, I just got a notification that one of my long-term predators just sent me a message. They're blocked from my channel, but nobody cares. He'll just type in my name into it to tag me in it. Anyway, in this video that I made, I explained very clearly, yes, according to your Jesus, according to your religion, according to your Bible, according to your book, that you keep wanting to use as your excuse not to do your paid jobs, not to do your job as a police officer, not to do your job as a 911 operator, not to do your job as a mandatory reporter and witness, not to do your job. You want to tell me, oh, well, I have friends in the police department. That's why I can't come forward and tell the truth. Well, thanks, Polly Olson, Dual County clerk. I already knew that. These people didn't come forward. They used their supposed religion as their excuse. So many times when I made a video and I stated that all of these people who wanted to use religion as their excuse to allow these things to happen, that I'm not willing to kill them. I tried to explain that there is a difference between saying that somebody is going to die, as Jesus did, and telling them that you are going to rape their sister with a fence post if they don't pretend to be a pedophile, a rapist, and a murderer of Natalie Bollinger. Now, these Christians, what they wanted to do, I was told to turn in Scott DaCosta to his own department, Dual County Sheriff's Department. So when I called to do that, instead of being allowed to do that, Leslie Snell had started working there. This is after I'd had to go public about her husband being implicated in threatening my life. From his own brother, Carl Snell, who was with Chris Kurth at the time. And all these people that wanted to claim to be Christian, who held positions of authority, people who I was repeatedly told to go to for help. What did they want to do? They wanted to pretend that I was threatening their lives. Because in a video where I was literally saying that there's a big difference between saying someone's going to die and the actual threats against my life. There's a big difference between what Jesus said, which applies to all of these people who claim to be Christian, And they wanted to pretend that I threatened to kill these people. Rod Wright, who recorded evidence that I absolutely need, because the Dual County Sheriff's Department was allowed to steal my computer by lying, running around telling everybody that I was schizophrenic. And my own public pretenders helped out the prosecution by, instead of looking up the Natalie Bollinger situation to find out if it's true, going out of their way to help the prosecution and run along with the mentally ill thing. I had announced that I was trying to turn in Leslie Snell and Scott DaCosta and former Denver officer William Barr and registered Nebraska pedophile at the time, Robert Franklin Warnick. I tried to turn the four of them in. All four of them work together. Leslie Snell is the notary who's on all of my other paperwork. She got a protection order against me, and I was prevented from going to that court date. How many times has that happened? Guess where I was? I was in prison. That's right, I was literally in prison when they had court, and she automatically won because I wasn't there. Scott Costa told the people at the prison that I was schizophrenic. Told the people at the Scottsbluff jail that I was schizophrenic. I was at two different prisons, and he told both of them that I was schizophrenic. Told the doctors I was schizophrenic. Told the nurses I was schizophrenic. Told people all around town that I was schizophrenic. Claims to be a Christian. They had to drop the charges, but not until after they'd gotten a hold of my evidence I was trying to turn in. That's not the only thing I was trying to turn in, by the way. In that hotel room, I had a AR-15 and a bunch of other stuff underneath the bed, and it stayed there the entire time I was in prison. And I tried to tell my attorney, hey man, me and Megan Misigatis had planned on getting me safely out of Dual County so that Scott Costa couldn't harm me anymore. And we were going to turn all of this in. We were going to turn in the fact that I was literally being forced to make firearms. We were going to turn in the fact that I was being physically assaulted, that my life was being threatened, that I was having to turn in my predators to themselves. And that Leslie Snell, when I had to turn in Scott DaCosta to himself, instead of listening to me, she wanted to get a very bad attitude, and she was recorded having that bad attitude and telling me what a good man that Scott DaCosta is. Well, I still have the right to turn this in, and she wouldn't let me do it. And she was also recorded on my YouTube channel. So she went to Scott DaCosta and wanted to have me arrested because she was recorded on my YouTube channel. And he told her, I'm sorry, but because of the position that you work, he's allowed to. And so she did everything that she could to retaliate against me. Oh, another notification from one of my stalkers. There are quite a few of them. This guy's been stalking me for, I'm going to say, at least 3 years. Might be closer to 6. Calls himself Ixuth, Ixuth. And I got 2 notifications while making this video. They make fake accounts with my picture or with my name, with stuff like baby raper written on it. And then when I speak out and I give examples of what I'm having to go through, how am I treated? I'm treated like a villain. I'm treated like I made it all up and that I'm having schizophrenic delusions and running around hurting people at random for absolutely no reason whatsoever, and reality shows I'm not a violent person. You can't just repeatedly physically assault me and expect me to just take it, but I have to. You have any idea how difficult it is to prevent yourself from moving while police officers are physically assaulting you? Because you know that if you move, then it's going to get worse. If you don't move, yeah, sure, they're going to accuse you of playing possum. You're rigid because they're hurting you, and you're trying not to move so that they don't hurt you for moving. There is no way to win that. And then they want to tell you about the Jesus? No. So I was illegally prevented from even being able to safely go to the courthouse or go to court. Mandy Singer was supposed to help me with that, and my sister was supposed to help me with that. And that screenshot that you got to see where my sister is explaining what's going on, obviously they weren't going to let that happen. Repeatedly, they pressed false charges on me, not just those 3. See, they charged me with 3 felonies. I spoke up about what I intended on doing because I knew that they had the power to retaliate against me for trying to turn them in. So, just like always, I spoke up publicly about my intent to turn in my predators. Just like I did at Joseph Michael Lopez court date, I spoke up very, very loud and proud about my intent to turn in the police in Natalie Bollinger's case, as well as her family, for the crimes that they continued to commit against me, including that recording with Jordan Anderson that was from the night before my grandmother's funeral. There's also the screenshots of exactly what Ted was typing. So that was Laura Nelson in that video, by the way. The one where it starts off with me in what looks like a knick-knack store. That's called Nettie's Treasures, and it's in Chapel, Nebraska. I spent 7 months locked up, being prevented from showing evidence that I was telling the truth about Natalie Bollinger, while Scott DaCosta told a bunch of people that she was a delusion and I was just making it up, and they never bothered to look it up. If I'm that mental, why did they have me sent to a prison instead of a mental hospital? If I had been allowed to go to a mental hospital, which is what legally they were supposed to do, I would have been allowed access to my evidence and the internet and access to make telephone calls. I wasn't even allowed to contact my public pretender until I'd been in prison for almost 40 days. I was prevented from going to my civil court against Leslie Snell, so she automatically won. And then they wanted to use that against me in the criminal cases. And you can see Leslie Snell's name is stamped on every single one of those criminal case pieces of paper. Her name is stamped all over them. And she claimed when she, in the paperwork for the civil court, she claimed that she didn't have anything to do with me, that basically that she didn't have any professional dealings with me or any other kinds of dealings with me. And her name is stamped all over the paperwork. Yes, she had dealings with me. Yes, there was a conflict of interest with her and with her boss. The conflict of interest started with her the moment that her husband was implicated in death threats against me. And these Christians that Scott DaCosta wanted to claim that I was threatening their lives and they were afraid for their lives. No, these people had literally threatened my life, literally physically assaulted me, literally been witnesses to situations that I was treated like I was delusional over. These people lied or omitted evidence to protect their friends and coworkers. Did Scott DaCosta and Leslie Snell tell them people in the civil court that the reason that I wasn't there is because they had me illegally put in prison? And then you get to see the pieces of paper showing that they had to dismiss those cases because there was no evidence and because the supposed victims didn't want to testify in court. Who were those supposed victims in the felony cases? That would be Robert Franklin Warnick, the registered pedophile, who was stalking me and assaulted me and broke a telephone full of evidence. Scott DaCosta and his whole department, going back for years. I mean, the Natalie Bollinger situation was all the way back in 2017, 2016, the first time that the Dual County Sheriff's Department knew anything about it. That's when I was able to get into housing in Chapel, Nebraska the first time. I believe that was also October. I think it was like the very end of October. It was right after I got back from Boulder. I mean, I'd only been out of Virginia less than 10 days, way less than 10 days. And we got me into housing in Chapel, Nebraska. But those Christians didn't come forward about those situations. What they did is they played victim. Rather than coming forward and telling the truth, which would have condemned and imprisoned their friends. These Christians help their friends to get away with doing this, into coercing me, into threatening me, false arrests. You have no idea how many police officers have assaulted me while I was incarcerated because I tried to turn in Officer Whale and Lolotai in Boulder. That goes on my arrest record. Anybody looks up my name, what do they see? Well, the charges were dropped. I was the one that was assaulted, but that doesn't matter. All they have to say is, praise Jesus, and all of a sudden everything they say must be the truth. Yeah, if a used car salesman sees that you're Muslim, he's going to be Muslim. If a used car salesman sees that you're Christian, he's going to be Christian. Being nice and pretending to be like you does not make somebody honest. Even Candace and her mom purported to be Christians, and they never once came forward about the things that they knew to be true. I've got the psychological evaluations from actual Oregon State forensics evaluators. This is their job. And all of them state very clearly that I am neither schizophrenic nor delusional, and that the situation with Natalie Bollinger, including the abuse, is very real. That needs to be taken into account. Regardless of how you want to manipulate your religion, you're a Christian when you don't want to do your job. But then all of a sudden, you can ignore the law because you're a Christian over and over and over again. But then when you want to play victim, all of a sudden you're going to manipulate every little thing that you can. And unfortunately, the Dual County Sheriff was definitely okay with that. They did it more than once. All to hide the fact that their department made mistakes years ago and then continued to abuse me afterwards over and over and over, using the mental health system to try to prevent me from having an honest court date, from showing evidence, from telling my side. Moral of the story is that if I were a Christian, which means follows in his footsteps, I wouldn't tell anybody that I was a Christian, because for many of us, that label is not assigned to good people.